It is March Madness. But before we get into that, though, the theme of underdogs is something that I opened the show with. And last night I was watching the Oscars. Now, the Oscars was, or at least at one time, it was an event that kind of transcended popular culture. It was really like the event of all events. And yes, if you're listening or watching this, you're probably thinking it's just a bunch of rich people with an excuse to get dressed up to go and hang out together. But there is a lot of work that goes into those films. And no matter what it has turned into now, it used to be the popular films and the money-making films would actually be the films that were good. And at the Oscars, it's sort of shifted away from that now, where the movies that people don't see are the ones that go to the Oscars. But I bring this up because last night, as a child of the 80s and 90s, I'm watching two people accept their awards, and there were obviously more. And I'm watching Ke Huy Quan. You know him as the kid from the Goonies, and you know him as the kid from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And then I watched Brendan Fraser accept the Best Actor award. And both of these guys are underdogs, really, in a great sense. I mean, the kid basically was out of Hollywood for 20-something years, gets this role he had been giving up, basically, and he wins Best Supporting Actor. And Brendan Fraser had been obviously a huge hit in the 90s. He was a leading man in the 90s in a lot of franchises, and then all of a sudden he just sort of disappeared. And as a child of the 80s and 90s, seeing that happen and seeing the emotion, the real emotion on their face, we talk about sports and how great it is and the emotion that comes with winning a championship or accomplishing something. And seeing that, it really almost brought me to tears. And I wanted to bring that up here because I don't know how you feel about The Goonies, for instance, but it's a movie that I watched as a kid and I'll always watch it. But I also know that you have a Brendan Fraser take.
Hey, you guys. I love The Goonies, man. You guys better watch it. We get too excited here. You might see a little truffle shuffle. But talking about, you mentioned some of the things that these two gentlemen have been through in their lives. One being a deep supporting actor throughout his entire career since his childhood, and Brendan Fraser obviously going from being a leading man and then having to go through some of the worst adversity possible. And usually once adults sort of phase out of Hollywood, especially under circumstances like that, you don't see them resurface, especially in a relevant way. You know me, man, the coach loves that. I mean, these guys are exhibiting that AFC North grit. They've had to get to this point. And I can only imagine, there's a lot of rumors that get thrown around about what the underbelly of Hollywood might be like in terms of how hard it might be for certain people to work their way up, because it is sort of a good old boys club and who you know and who owes you a favor and this and that. And to see these guys overcome a lot of those things and just simply get by on good old-fashioned hard work and talent is impressive. And, you said I do have a Brendan Fraser take, and that is he was a quote-unquote leading man in one of the worst sports movies I've ever seen, and that is The Scout, if you have not seen it. He plays a pitcher named Steve Nebraska who lives somewhere in like Central America in this really like podunk town. And they, of course, play baseball as they do everywhere in Central America. And a scout for the New York Yankees sort of makes a bad move, a bad pick, a bad recommendation. He gets exiled to this, what they perceive as this wasteland of baseball. And he comes across Steve Nebraska. And he, of course, throws the ball a million miles an hour, but he's very eccentric, very unique. Very uncultured when it comes to like American culture, and it's interesting in ways, but it's just a really bad movie all around. And I would say that I was gonna say it's worth your time, but it really isn't. You might be able to find a trailer for it somewhere that would probably do the trick.
I mean, if you're planning on calling in the show, perhaps watching the movie and either agreeing with or disagreeing with the coach's take on that, maybe that's a good use of your time. So definitely think about it. But again, I brought it up because the emotion. Over the weekend, I was watching a lot of golf. The Players was on, and we're not going to deep dive into that at all. But what's amazing is whenever something happens in sports, and the reaction from the players or the athletes or whoever is so jubilant that you realize that, number one, everybody is a kid at some point, and number two, that's hard as shit to do. And whenever a guy gets a hole-in-one, they celebrate like they've won the Masters, because these guys are the top less than 1% of people who can do this internationally, and getting a hole-in-one is nearly impossible still.
Absolutely. Getting a hole-in-one is nearly impossible. But one of the best things about the game of golf is that even a schmuck like me who doesn't play as much as I'd like to, and I'm not very good, can luck my way into a great shot once in a while. And so it's one of those things that anyone can achieve, but very few people do achieve it. And it's almost impossible to replicate. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of skill behind it, especially at that level. But it just takes a lot of luck, and I think that's why you see the emotion, the outpouring of emotion, because they know how rare it is and how unique it is to happen. And I love that. That's my favorite part about sports. Every part of it, whether it's fandom or playing it, is just the emotion that gets wrapped up in it.
Absolutely. And to segue to the NCAA tournament, at the Oscars last night, you had the underdog stories, and then you had Jamie Lee Curtis, who basically wins a Body of Work award, a Lifetime Achievement Award, by finally winning an Oscar. First time nominated, first time win. And when I look at the NCAA tournament bracket, the selection show was last night. I did watch it. You did hold out on us, though, and didn't tell us that the head of the selection committee works at Bradley University. Like, when were you going to friggin' tell us that?
Honestly, it didn't even occur to me. I knew it. It's always been in my brain up there with the otother useless bits of information. But yeah, he's the vice president of intercollegiate athletics at Bradley, aka the athletic director. I think they've jazzed up the title and given him some more responsibility, possibly. But yeah, Chris Reynolds, head of the committee, has been for a couple of years. He's a really sharp guy. I tell you, a school like Bradley's very, very lucky to have him. He's from Peoria originally, which is probably a big part of why he's still here. But he spent time at Northwestern in Indiana. I believe he may have played for Bobby Knight at Indiana, if I'm not mistaken.
He made a Final Four.
Yeah, and Bradley's lucky to have him, and obviously to see Bradley on the national scale, even if it's not for what they're doing on the floor, just to kind of have a voice in the room is pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought so. And when they showed it, they showed Bradley University, and I thought, wait, this guy played there? Like, that's amazing to have the head of the selection committee. But the selection committee has a hard job. And last week, maybe I did take a little bit of a crap on conference tournaments and all that, because I do feel like in some respects it is extra basketball just for the sake of extra basketball. But once we get the selection show and you realize that they have crafted this tournament bracket that is really difficult to do and how much work they have to do to get to it, I realized that he is the perfect man for the job, because they're asking him, why did you choose this team over this team? And he had concise answers, but actually relevant answers. Hey, they had chances recently to up their resume and they failed to do so. But when I'm looking at the bracket as a whole, as somebody who, again, is 40 years old now and grew up in a different time in sports, and we know that collegiate athletics has completely changed now. The way that they recruit, everything is different. I'm looking at the top two tiers, the number 1 seeds and the number 2 seeds, and it's a lot of schools that traditionally haven't been there. The schools that you and I grew up basically assuming we're going to be 1 or 2 seeds, Duke, North Carolina, schools like that, they're not in the top tier anymore. They have transitioned because longstanding coaches like Coach K have retired. The game is being handed over to a new crop of coaches, but there are still some people out there like Tom Izzo, who's sort of buried in the bracket somewhere. Rick Pitino, the vampire, is at Iona. He may be the next St. John's coach. But that's what I took away, is that this is sort of a new wave of college basketball. A lot of schools that have not traditionally been known are now at the top, and this is the future.
Yeah, and you're seeing some teams from the South, from the SEC in particular, with Alabama getting the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. Then, of course, Houston. Now, Houston does have a little bit of a basketball history. The whole five Slamma-Jamma days back with Akeem Olajuwon and those guys. But yeah, it's been a little bit since they've been on this level for sure. And they spent most of the season as number 1 in the country. And you talked about conference tournaments and how relevant they are. Houston, Kansas, and Purdue all basically played themselves out of a crack at the number 1 overall seed by losing their conference championship games. And Alabama won their title game. But you're right. It's a new crop, but Kansas is the only what I'd consider like blue blood that is on the number 1 seed line. Purdue's not, they're kind of on the periphery of the Blue Bloods, I would say, being in the Big Ten, and they've got some tradition there, but maybe not what you'd expect, or you would associate with a Michigan State or Michigan, Indiana, someone like that.
That's just something that struck me, but I wanted to ask you, and I know this is not basketball related, but the number 1 overall seed, you mentioned Alabama, and I would say that the last month or so for Alabama basketball has been tumultuous at best, and yes, they have been winning, so it hasn't been tumultuous on the court, but it has been off the court. And all of the things swirling around that program with an ex-player who has now been, I believe, convicted of murder, and their best player on the team who, through many testimonies, seems to be the person who gave him the gun that ended somebody's life. And this is a very complicated matter. And their coach seemed to stumble at every turn when asked about this. Didn't seem like he was thinking about it in any sort of contrite way. And I just found the whole thing very uncomfortable. And then you find out that there is a handful of students, only a handful, this is not the fan base at all, are wearing T-shirts that say, "Killing our way through the SEC Tournament 2023." That's about as tone deaf as you can get. But I wanted to ask you, because we've talked morals on here before, how do you feel about this kid still playing on this team? And it sort of, to me, feels very, this is the culture of winning and this is what we're going to do until he's basically behind bars.
So my initial reaction is Alabama is selling their soul for a shot at a NCAA basketball championship. That's my initial reaction. Now, to dig a little deeper, I think obviously not knowing the scale of whatever evidence is there, just what we've been told through the media, if you're the university and no formal charges have been brought against this young man and it's still an investigation that's ongoing, do you take this away from that young man and his teammates? I mean, because he's the best player, one of the best players on the team. Do you take this opportunity away from all of them? And then let's say things somehow his name gets cleared, 6 months down the road, and you can't give that back, right? If this indeed does pan out and end up being something that some responsibility with this does fall on his lap in a legal sense, he'll have to pay the piper, so to say, whether it's falling out of completely, maybe the NBA draft, maybe some sort of formal charges come against him. I don't feel good about it. It's so tough to make a statement with too much conviction without really knowing the evidence. And I understand, it's absolute, what happen's terrible, but it's just tricky. But on the surface, it feels really dirty.
It just brings to light that all of these instances that seem to have gun violence, it's just kind of crazy to me that so many athletes seem to go down that road. And it's not just this Alabama kid, it's John Morant, it's others. And I guess you're right, though. If there are no formal charges, what are they supposed to do? I hear what you're saying, though. And I think that in the end, what will be, justice will be served in some way. It's just when you have something that's a murder around their program, it's so uncomfortable. And I go back to Aaron Hernandez and think about all the things that we found out he was doing while he was at Florida. And we've asked ourselves, what did Urban Meyer know? He had to have known something was going on because the second life that he led was just so crazy. This situation sounds like it was some kind of a misunderstanding. But man, when somebody's life is taken, it just feels so much different. It feels so grave. And I don't know. I'm not going to not root for the kid or not root for Alabama, but I think you're absolutely right. When you're staring at the football team with how many national championships, the basketball team hasn't been relevant maybe ever. This is their chance. This might be their only chance, and they're going to take it. And I guess I can't really blame them.
I mean, and another layer of this is a university. Most universities do have a code of conduct or code of ethics or honor code or something like that. So even without any formal charges, I assume that just the association with the incident would violate any credible code of ethics or conduct that may exist at most universities. That being said, unfortunately, more and more these days, college sports is big business, and you have high dollar donors behind these programs. The people who are in control of these universities from an administrative standpoint, they're sort of in the palm of some of these donors sometimes. I'm not saying this is the case, but it's a possibility. There may be a multi-million-dollar donor somewhere in Alabama that's said, if you take this kid off the floor, I'm pulling my support. And that's a significant amount of money to pull. And I'm not saying, again, that is the case, but that's sort of the climate and the culture that exists amongst major sports programs at these colleges these days, unfortunately.
And that's not really going to change. I mean, if the donors don't come out and say that they have a problem with it, and in Alabama they probably wouldn't, then what's the coach supposed to do? He just should have handled it a little bit better in the media. But let's switch to the basketball. And some of the other takeaways that I had, and this is an old man boomer sort of take. It's not even a negative take, but as I'm listening to Greg Gumbel call out these teams and call out their conferences, my mind is just all screwed up because they're calling out conferences that in basketball I have associated with so many other teams. Like, I can't remember who they said was the Conference USA champion, and I automatically was like, oh, that used to be Cincinnati way back in the day. It's not anymore. And that's just something that I've realized over time. And I don't think that I've really paid as much attention until we started doing this show and talking about all this realignment stuff, is that so many things have changed. And then I think what put sort of a stamp on that was Jim Boeheim retiring from Syracuse. I think they sort of asked him to leave. There was a whole awkwardness with that press conference. But Jim Boeheim pretty much is the last vestige of the old guard in college basketball. I mean, Tom Izzo is that as well. But man, Jim Boeheim had been there for 47 years, and he represents what was Big East basketball. Big East basketball is nothing like it was. And Marquette was great this year, but You and I probably remember Big East basketball being at Madison Square Garden, being the classic teams, your Georgetowns, your UConn, schools like that, St. John's. And it's just not like that anymore. And I think I don't have an issue with it. It just struck me, though, that we really are in a new era of college basketball, so much so that the coaches that we've always sort of leaned on to know in the NCAA tournament, they're not there anymore. And Jim Boeheim should have retired a long time ago, like I said last week, but man, 47 years at the same school. Think about how much has changed in college basketball in that time frame.
Yeah, it's incredible. And there's a great ESPN 30 for 30, it's called Requiem of the Big East. It talks about the history of the conference, how they developed and everything else. It's really interesting. But to watch that and you see Jim Boeheim, and he's kind of built up to be this larger than life icon, and he really has been. And to see him go out the way he did is sad. Because Coach K kind of got to go out the right way and on his own terms. And I think that Jim Boeheim, as much as some people don't care for him, I think that he deserved and has earned that right to go out on his own terms. And maybe he's had that opportunity and just chosen not to. Who knows what's happened behind closed doors and meetings at Syracuse. But it's sad to see it happen the way it did. But you're right. A lot of the old guard is gone. And it'll be interesting who sort of rises up to kind of take the throne, per se. Bill Self's been around for a while at Kansas, but he's still got a ways to go, I think, before he's really getting up there. And there's a couple others, but it'll be interesting to see where we sit, in 5-10 years, like who replaces them in the hierarchy of college basketball coaches.
And the landscape of college sports is going to change even more in that time period, to the point that we may not even recognize what the NCAA tournament looks like anymore. But another story that kind of piqued my interest is Marquette. And I mentioned them a little bit earlier about the Big East. And I completely forgot that their head coach is Shaka Smart, a guy who took VCU, local university around here, to the Final Four, cashed that in for the job at Texas, didn't do very well, got fired, and he goes back to Marquette, is redeeming himself. And this is a legitimately great basketball team. And I think it's amazing because they had Shaka Smart and Chris Beard, who seem to be polar opposites in terms of what they are personally. And I love seeing stories like that, man. We talked about underdogs at the beginning. Shaka Smart getting that redemption story. That's another thing that's great about sports.
I've always been a Shaka Smart fan. And I think the fact that he came from a mid-major level program at VCU where they had a lot of success before he left there, and he does just have one of those very, he has a great personality. He's very charismatic. He's easy to like. And it is a shame that things didn't work out at Texas. I never thought that was a great fit anyways. It's just Texas doesn't seem as serious about basketball as Shaka Smart would probably need a place to be. And Marquette sounds like a great fit. And it is nice to see him kind of redeem himself, get his career back on track, and have his team in a good position to make a run here.
Yeah, I'm really going to be rooting for them, because I think that if you look at the top 8 teams, and by the way, the number 1 seeds for this tournament, Alabama was the overall number 1. You had Purdue, Houston, Kansas, as you mentioned. The number 2 line was Arizona, which is another kind of blue blood, even though they haven't won in a long time, but the Lute Olson years and all that. Marquette, UCLA, obviously their history does not need to be mentioned here, and Texas. So there are a lot of really good schools in that line, and Marquette just doesn't seem like they fit in with all those other schools in terms of basketball success, but they're a force to be reckoned with, so I'm looking forward to it. Now let's go to the actual action itself. So it has changed over the years. It used to be a tournament of 64 for probably my entire life up until recently. I'd say about, 10 years ago, they started doing the first 4, and it's now a tournament of 68. I wanted to ask you fundamentally how you felt about the first 4 model in general.
When they first started it, I thought it was weird. It just seemed awful. I'm like, what's the point of only adding 4 teams? This just seems strange. As time's passed, I've become to like it more and more. One thing, I don't like people calling it the play-in games, because it's not you're in the tournament.
Yeah, you're in.
You know what I mean? Like, you're in. This isn't play to get in. You're in. And one thing, too, that it does is it adds an opportunity for these schools that are playing in those games to earn some money that they wouldn't get otherwise, because they're playing an even opponent, at least seed-wise, and that's an extra unit that they'll get for winning that game ahead of the traditional first round, which is a really great opportunity. A lot of people kind of scoff at the first 4, but I think it is a nice opportunity as far as that goes. And another thing I take from it, we get to see some good matchups, because those are the only games where they are literally the same seed, right? So they should be very evenly matched games. And then the tournament starts a couple days earlier for all of us, which is great too.
I was in the same boat as you about the first four. I really didn't like it at first. And I think what really I didn't like the most was the fact that they called it the first round and they really screwed up all of the nomenclature going forward where they're like, the first day is the second round. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's the first round. Stop it. Like, we're not doing all that. And then they actually course corrected on that. But I want to build on something that you talked about. You talked about earning money. The other thing that I didn't realize that it did up until recently, honestly, was it gives these schools that basically have no chance of winning all these 16 seeds, it gives them a chance to actually win an NCAA tournament game, and it gets them exposure. Because these kids are good basketball players in their own right. Just because they don't play at one of the blue blood schools doesn't mean that they're not great at basketball. And it's awesome to get to see these schools that do not have nearly the same infrastructure and financing as these other blue bloods like Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, to get a little bit of spotlight. And you're right, the games are mostly very, very good. For the 11 seeds, though, what I love about it is basically if you played a season and you're on the bubble, you get a chance now. It's not really a play-in game per se, but okay. We gave you the opportunity. You didn't really show us that you belonged in here in earnest fully, but you're going to get an opportunity to show it, and you're going to have to beat another team that is on your level, another team that basically is a bubble team. That part of it I actually do like, because the biggest complaint that I always have is the 65th team always bitching and moaning basically and whining. And now it's like, all right, you actually get the chance to play another team that's in that same realm, and you got to beat them to get in.
Yeah, well, now it's just the 69th team bitching and moaning, right? I mean,
I know.
No matter how many teams you let in, the next couple that didn't make it are going to be upset. But you mentioned these are good basketball teams, and we just talked about VCU a minute ago. I'm pretty certain that one of the years that VCU made a run in the tournament, they came out of the first four.
They did.
As an 11 seed, as you said, and made a run. And I don't know if it was an Elite Eight run. I don't know, but they went deep in the tournament from that round, which was awesome to see, because I think that was something that sort of, in my mind, that gave legitimacy to those games a little bit. Like, hey, these teams belong here. You know, these teams are in the tournament. Like I said, they belong here. This isn't just some sort of throwaway, irrelevant game that's happening. It matters. And no, I'm excited.
The other thing that it does is it gives momentum, because you talk about playing an extra game, and sometimes in other sports, well, we have to play an extra game, but you get that momentum rolling. And then you're facing a team that's been off for 5 or 6 days. And now it's like, hey, we just got this big win. What if we made a buzzer beater? And all of a sudden now we're ready to go. So sometimes the 6 seeds that get the play-in game, or they get the first 4 winner, I feel like they're at a disadvantage, because sometimes all it takes, and you said this about Bradley and about conference tournaments, all it takes is to get hot for a few days, and you never know. You could make a huge run, and sometimes that can be the win that catapults them to a Sweet 16 berth.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for kind of getting the butterflies out ahead of time. And I saw it even in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, because it was a 12-team bracket and the top 4 seeds all had byes. So the teams that won the games in the first round the day prior, they came out and all the games where they in that second round where they played the top 4 seeds, all of those games were close. Every single one of them was close. The teams that won the day prior, I mean, they came out guns a-blazing. And you could definitely tell. In my opinion, I thought that they were in a much better frame of mind to compete than the teams that were just getting on the floor for the first time.
It makes you wonder if rest in basketball is not nearly the same as it is in football. In football, it's such a physical sport and it's so jarring that getting an extra week off could make the difference between being 80% and 90%. But in basketball, if you're getting an extra day off, that maybe doesn't do anything for you. And again, it gives momentum to these teams that have nothing to lose. That's the other thing, is if you're coming out of the play-in, you have nothing to lose. And if you're one of those teams that it's like you're supposed to win, and that's the thing that I love about the NCAA tournament, is all the rankings are gone. And all you see now are those seeding numbers. And it really throws everything and it makes it different. And you put expectations on teams that have those low numbers. So if you're number 2 seed, we have expectations of you because you should be beating a vast majority of the teams in this tournament. And that's not how it goes. The number doesn't mean anything. It just tells you where a team is based off of the field. But once you get on the court, all bets are off. And that's why the tournament is so great. And you see so many upsets all the time.
Oh, 100%. And to talk about, a team having momentum, I think that basketball is a game of rhythm, getting into a rhythm and muscle memory. And I think, the closer you can put games together while still getting some rest in between is ideal. That's one thing I'm nervous about Bradley tomorrow night is it's been a week and a half since they've played. I'm a little curious what things look like. Wisconsin just played a few days ago, so they might kind of still have that rhythm going a little bit, but it's definitely relevant. And like you said, right now, throw all the rankings out the window. The seeds put you in the tournament. The better you perform through the year, theoretically, you're going to get seeded better, which again, in theory, gives you a better opportunity to advance in the tournament based on position and the teams you're going to have to play along the way. But once they toss that ball up, man, throw it all out the window. You're going to get everybody's best shot every game.
I am so friggin' excited. But let me ask you, where does going to an NCAA tournament fall in your sports bucket list?
Not as high as you might think it does. And for me, though, it's only because they play the Final Four usually in like a football stadium somewhere. And at this point in time in my life, I mean, the type of ticket that I'd even be willing to pay for, I'd probably have to bring binoculars to see what's happening.
Opera glasses.
And I'd much rather watch it from the comfort of my living room at this point in time. Now, if let's say that I was fortunate enough to win courtside seats or something like that to the Final Four, I think it'd be fantastic and I'd really enjoy it. In the real world, I don't know that it would be something I'd be too intrigued by.
I was fortunate to go to the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 rounds when they were here back in 2013. Gosh, 10 years ago now. And those were like $600 a ticket, but I was behind one of the baskets, so like a few rows up. So we actually had decent seats. Now, not the greatest because you can't really see as much what's going on the other side of the court, but the atmosphere was great. I didn't have a team in the running, and it was so awesome to be there and see them cut down the nets and stuff like that. And I believe Marquette actually was the team that went to the Final Four that year. That was when Buzz Williams was the coach before he came to Virginia Tech and resurrected our program. And it's just a lot of fun. But had it not been something I had done and I had to decide right now what was on my sports bucket list, it probably would have been down the totem pole. But I have a hot take for you. Going to a Super Bowl, not on my sports bucket list.
Not for me either, man. Like some of those big time events, they're just not what they're all cracked up to be. I think if you're able to go and enjoy them in a certain way, like the best possible way with the best seats and the best experience where, you don't have to go through all the minutia that the ordinary fan does, I think it'd be awesome. Right. But for the normal fan experience, yeah, I'm not here for that. I'd rather, like I said, watch it from the comfort of my own living room.
So you like to fill out a bracket. I like to fill out a bracket. And I think that we should do something. I think that you and I should each fill out a bracket and make it public on social media, not for any type of contest, but I think just to keep ourselves honest and to let the listeners and the viewers keep us honest. But if you had to give me a gut feeling about who you think is going to win the national championship right now, gun to your head, terrible analogy, right now, who would it be?
Kansas Jayhawks. I have the Kansas Jayhawks picked to win the tournament. I'm in a little... the company I work for, we do like an office pool, a whole company-wide thing. It's fun. I filled it out this morning, and I picked the Kansas Jayhawks to win the tournament. Are you interested in what my Final Four is?
Sure.
Okay, so I did have Alabama in the Final Four. I had Alabama, and I believe I may have had Marquette in the Final Four, and on the other side, it was Kansas and Houston. So, I mean, I went pretty chalk for the most part. I mean, I had a few upsets early on, but mine's chalk most of the way through, which honestly I feel like is the safer way to go if you are trying to win a bracket pool or something like that.
I agree. I think you usually have to go 1s and 2s a lot of times, maybe some 3s. It kind of depends on where teams are seated. Sometimes you get a sneaky seed like Gonzaga's a 4. That could be a little bit sneaky, something like that. But I agree with you. So if I had to give you a gut feeling about who I think is going to win, Kansas does stand out to me as well because of everything with Bill Self recently. They're definitely on an emotional ride. But when I see teams like Arizona, they've played a lot of really tough competition. The Pac-12 is actually good. We make fun of it in football, but UCLA and Arizona getting on that 2 line is pretty special. But I don't do a bracket until the night before. I let all the games play out because we don't pick the first 4. So I wait until everything happens. And it's sort of like a Zen experience for me because I don't know enough about it. So I sit down and it's all feel. That's all I do. I sit down and whatever the first name that I write on that paper is, that's right. I do it on a pen and paper. That's the only way to do it.
You fit right in with our baseball fans.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But sometimes there's just a feel about it. And then once it's done, I'm done. I do one bracket. That's it. I don't do more than one. That is it. So the bracket that I have here will be the bracket that I use the entire time because I think you have to have one bracket. And if you win on that bracket, you are the man. And I will say this, my father, when he was working, I won his office pool at 11 years old.
That's something to be proud of, man. Do you have that bracket sheet framed anywhere?
My father does have it, and the reason he has it is because I picked an entire region correct. That was 1995 when UCLA won the national championship.
That is incredible, man. That is an awesome, awesome story. You should dust that thing off maybe for next week's show, and we could break it down a little bit.
That would require my father using technology, which is not something he's very good at, so that probably won't happen. But the NCAA tournament is exciting. You all know this. I talked about this last week. Thursday, if you're looking for me, you need to find me. My ass will be on the couch. I will be watching these games. I will have multiple screens up. Who knows what the hell will be going on? But the NCAA tournament will be on. I love it. I love everything about it. And then I'll stop caring about college basketball, probably starting around the Elite Eight, because that's generally when I start to peter out a little bit. But for the purposes of this show, we will keep ourselves honest, and we will post our brackets. So you can look for that on Twitter at Iceman and Coach is the handle to do that.